everyone, and welcome back to Happening by Chance. My name is Mariana, and today I am here with the third episode for my Marseille teaching videos. So in these videos I am sharing my method or the way that I read Marseille, combining the method that I learned from my teachers and then from a lot of things that I've seen online, and then my way of viewing the cards. The first episode of this series was how to read Marseille the easy or an easy way. I don't remember. You can see it linked down below. And in that one, I showed you my 3-step process, which is function, interaction, and then story. And through that you get a narrative that can answer a question. So in the second installment, I showed an exercise to practice function, and then for the third installment, I was going to do an explanation of interaction. But I realized that there was one concept that I wanted to talk about before I went into the interaction. And it's a concept that I think it's super important, that I think it's, in my opinion, it's necessary. And it's the concept of polarity. And it's in general polarity, but today specifically we are going to focus on the polarity in the pips. And for that I am going to be using the Noblet Tarot by Claude Flornoy, which is a very popular deck, so you might have seen it if you have seen Marseille videos. I actually don't use it much because, rather controversially, I don't love this deck. I love it when I see it in video and in pictures, and every time I see it in video and in pictures, it makes me want to take out mine and use it. But then when I take out mine in real life, I haven't loved it. So today I am hoping that I'm going to be surprised, because it's been a while since I've used it. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be surprised and that I'm going to realize that I do love it. So the reason why I want to talk about this topic and explain this topic, and I think it's important to do so before continuing with the 3 steps. I hesitate to call them steps because they are not really steps as such, rather than, I don't know, like 3 concepts that I keep in mind to interpret cards, to read cards. Rather, read cards. That's the word I like. Why do I think it's important to talk about this, and specifically why do I think it was important before continuing? So when I've been doing my series in the other videos that I mentioned, I have explained that in the function video, I explained that we take the symbolic intention of the cards through the function, right? So instead of like the meanings of the cards, you take the function of the card, and that gives you the symbolic interpretation that helps you with your reading. And so when I explained that concept, I mentioned that the swords were aggressive because the swords are a weapon, but in that nuance they can attack, but they can also defend. So basically they cut, the swords cut, so they are a bit more aggressive. Whereas the cups, they are soft, way softer, right? Here, if you think of this as a chalice, like a chalice used for, I don't know, blessings and stuff, well, that's pretty soft, right? Way softer than than a weapon. But then also we see the cups. Let me see if I have cups here. I don't have cups here, but also we see the cups as like, you drink wine out of a cup, right? So if you go to a party, you would toast with your friends using a cup. You would drink to something. So that's why we get the association of like the social and I guess emotional aspect of the cups, right? Because it has this social element of the gathering, of the toasts, of the drinking together, right? So I explained that, and I explained that because of that, therefore, the cups were softer and the swords were more aggressive, right? Let's use these two cards, right? So they are not equivalent in number. I wanted them to be equivalent. So this is the 10 of swords and this is the 9 of cups, but I guess it works as well. So in this case you would have like 9 cups, right? So it's a lot of softness. I'm still doing like a summary, okay? I'm going to get to the polarity in a second. So you get the softness, right? That's what I was explaining in that other video, right? Like you would get the softness, like the wines, the drinking, the toasts, the party, etc. And then this one would be more aggressive because it's like you get a lot of swords, and even if you see these, right, it's really dense because they are many swords. Do I have if you see this compared to this is much denser than this, right? So they are both aggressive, but this one is more dense than this one. So that's what I was explaining in that video. And then I received comments that said that that people don't like to see the swords as aggressive, and so that they were going to change the signification. And I've seen comments like that online, right? The whole point of this video was to change the idea of the quote-unquote scary cards being negative and the not scary cards being positive, because I feel like those two are the words that confuse us, because we as a society have been trained to put a moral evaluation on a binary polarity that was never meant to be moral. So if you have a magnet, you have a polarity, right? It's positive and negative, but the polarity in a magnet or in the planet is not a moral binary. So like the positive pole in a magnet is not the good pole, and then the negative pole in a magnet is not the bad pole, right? The morality is something that we are introducing because that's like the ideological discourse. That's not what it is. So first, let's change the words positive and negative, which, as I have just said, they don't mean a moral judgment. They don't mean a moral qualification. It's a polarity. But for the sake of how hard it is for us to separate the polarity from the moral, let's remove the words positive and negative. And what I want us to do is to recognize that there is a polarity in the tarot, and here specifically we are talking about Marseille, classical tarot, Italian pips, all that. And specifically, even more specifically, today we are talking about the pips. So if you noticed, I use the words harsh and soft. This is harsher. than this, which is softer. There is no moral connotation. It is a polar, it's a gradient, it's a polarity. If you think of a color gradient, that's what this is. And in the pips of the Marseille, the gradient is made very clear, but I'm jumping ahead. So let's stick here for just a moment. Harsh and soft, cold and warm, right? It is a polarity. And as I said, it doesn't imply moral, it implies a gradient. And I'm going to give you an example from a reading I did for a client that is going to exemplify in terms of a reading why it's not even scary to have harsh cards, because we put that polarity, that morality in the cards. We think that if we get a harsher card in terms of the polarity in a reading, then it's going to be a scary reading for a client or a friend or whoever. And that is not necessarily the case. That is our moral implication that we are giving the tarot from our buried in the psyche toxic positivity, because we are automatically assigning that value, that moral value, to a polar quality. I don't know if polar quality is the right word in English. That can mean many different things. So I am going to give you an example from a reading from a client. I just want to quickly show you what I mean when I'm talking about the gradient. So if you see the downward de-escalation of the Marseille pips. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to show you the entire suit. But if you see this, in terms of the image, I want you to see the images. I want you to see the word. We are not talking about meanings, nothing. In terms of the image, it's lowering in density, literal density. There is more white space here because there are fewer ones than there is here. Like I said here, right? It's lowering in density. So if you think of gradient, a color gradient. So if this is night and this is day, if this is black and this is white, if this is hard and this is soft, you see the gradient, right? As this, this one like this. As this decreases, and I put the aces here just because the ace is, the primordial, right? Even though it's just one, in terms of like the energy, I guess, that's why I'm putting it as like the top. But if that's confusing, let's remove that, right? And just go here and see, as it decreases, that would be the gradient. And so if you had black and white, which again is not a moral judgment, it's a polarity that has nothing to do with morality, there would be grace, right? This would be more soft, less soft, right? And as it gets less soft, it gets closer to the harsh. So this is harsh, but not as harsh as this, right? This is soft, but not as soft as this. So this would be closer, right? So that is the gradient, right? That's how the polarity works. In terms of the quality, I'm sorry because I struggle with vocabulary because English is not my first language. So I'm going to say of the quality, right? In terms of the or value is the word value, but not moral value. Where are all the aces? Okay, so here are the aces. In terms of the value for the polarity, the way we read the polarity in the Marseille, and remember that I am going to give you right now an example that explains the importance of the polarity, of having the polarity in the tarot, and here specifically the Marseille, and here specifically the pips. I'm going to give you an example from a client reading, and then at the end I'm just going to give you an alternative if you are still not convinced. Okay. But let's just keep going. So in terms of how the value, these two are the soft or softer, warmer, gentler suits, and these two would be the harsher, colder, more aggressive suits. So now, why is it so important to have a polarity? Why did I remove the aces? Okay, let's just whatever. What? Why is it so important to have a polarity in the deck? In a deck for a tarot reading, simply because the tarot is meant to be able to represent the whole spectrum of life. Spectrum is the key word. You remember how I was speaking about gradient. Spectrum is another word, right? It's not a moral binary, it is a polar spectrum, I guess. That would be the way to explain whether the vocabulary is accurate or not. I think you understand what I'm trying to say. So in the same way where life is not a moral binary, but it is more like a polar spectrum, because it does have those high highs and low lows. Life has that, and therefore it has to be in the tarot in order to give accurate readings. Firstly, how are you going to do a reading for someone, an useful reading, right, about a hard, difficult moment, if you don't have hard, difficult cards, if you don't have harsh versus soft in the same way that life has harsh versus soft? That's like the main way. It is also about giving useful readings. And if you only have one end of the polarity spectrum, then there is no way that you can give a useful reading. You can give uplifting readings. And sometimes uplifting readings are just what you need. That is true. But having the full spectrum allows you to give readings for any situation, not only the ones where you want a uplifting feeling. And so I'm going to give you an example of what I mean from a real life reading, and one that is going to show why the harsh cards, remember harsh in terms of the spectrum, why they are not always scary or harsh to receive, I guess, in terms of a reading. So I was doing a reading for a person who has a business, and they were having a situation at the business. And so I was doing a reading for that, to see, right, the situation. And the significator that we are working with, I had right here. Okay, so the significator we are working with is the King of Swords. We are not going to talk today about like the eyesight, eye line, any of those stuff. We're keeping to the example about polarity. Obviously, that person came to know what they could do, what actions to take, etc., to improve the situation at the business. It was a big reading, but I'm going to show you a part of the reading where there was the Ace of Swords, which, if you see the image, it is pretty harsh, right? You have the hand with the sword. In Spanish, I would say empuñando. I don't know how to say that in English. You have these, like, I don't know, they look like spits of like fire, or just like a design element that makes it even more, explosive, I guess. So we got the Ace of Swords, which, again, in terms of the polarity, the Ace of Swords would be the harshest card, peep card. It obviously, depending on the reading, depending on the context, how you interpret, but the swords are always the aggressive. So the idea is that, or the common belief is that if there are swords, it's always like oof, yikes, that feeling. And often it can be like that, because again, it's a polarity representing the full spectrum of life, and the card was after the significator, right? If it had been before the significator, and here is where you can see the difference in how the polarity performs. Because if it had been before, it would be like a sword coming at them, and it could be a scarier concept. But because it was here, it was, and according to the whole reading, it was very much like they were holding the sword. Through talking, through the reading, through everything, part of the context is heavily important in a reading. Part of the context was that they are very struggle with being in a position of leadership. And so because of that, they sometimes can be not as assertive as they could be. And, in the decision making, in the organizing the people, in everything. And so in this case, it really was take the weapon, quote unquote, because of course it's a symbol, it's not literal. Take the weapon in your hand. Rather than being scary, it becomes empowering. So you see how through having this polarity of harshness, you can get an uplifting message that is useful, because it is a very clear, you have to take charge. And because in the case of the swords, and because of the specific reading, it talks about cutting with the sword, cuts, work, etc. And I mean, it has other connotations symbolically. Obviously, it doesn't literally mean harm people, like, but I'm not going to get into the full details of the reading for this client. I just wanted to show you how you are taking a harsh card, but it is saying you are the king. Grab the sword. You have to stop staying quiet, staying behind the desk, not making decisions, not making the hard decisions, right? You can and must wield the sword, decide, be assertive, be the leader. And that is from a harsh card. With a fuller reading, this gave a specific meaning of an action that they had to take. But again, I'm not doing the full reading, but without that polarity, that action would not have shown in the reading. If you didn't dare to put all the polarity, that those actions, concrete actions of the full spectrum of life, are not going to show up in the reading. There's a lot of talk about how people don't like their oracles to be too love and light, and they like oracles to have more negative cards as well as the positive cards. But then when it comes to a tarot, people really like tarot to be all love and light. And when I say this, people might say, no, that's not what we mean. But it is like in the maybe you don't realize, right? But you are scared of putting into the tarot associations that are scary. It's kind of like washed down the tarot, right? It's like softening the edges. I feel like people are trying to get out of the toxic positivity that kind of like invaded New Age for a while. But I feel like that toxic positivity is buried deep down where it's not conscious, but you are still kind of afraid of that contrast, right? And so you get changes, for instance, in not naming the death card, or those cards that are scary, changing the name to something more uplifting, right? So it's kind of like skipping a step in the grief process, if you think about that, right? It would be like if you have, I don't know, you are a therapist and someone is grieving, and it's this whole five steps, or I don't remember the number, but there are several steps in the grieving process, right? And so maybe someone is in the rage phase, and it would be like telling that person, no, let's change the name of your rage to transformation, because your rage is going to lead you to a transformation. That is absolutely true, but the rage needs to be felt at the moment, right? And so changing the names of the scarier cards is like not allowing the person to be in that moment for that moment. That moment is necessary. Then, yes, sure, then there can be a transformation. But I don't know, it's, having cancer, all those types of things. I don't know, if I'm crying because I got bad news at the doctor, and someone tells me, no, but think of like the good things that will come after, I absolutely want to throw that person out of the window, right? Right now, I need to cry. I need to feel that. And I feel like everyone agrees. And when it comes to Oracle, that's how everyone wants it. But when it comes to Tarot, it's still very much like, no, but let's change the scary cards. Anyway, I went on a whole rant that I wasn't expecting to go on. I'm not. I guess I'm not in a very good place emotionally. If you have noticed, I haven't been uploading a lot of videos. I have been going through a lot of stuff, a lot of doctors, and today I had an oncologist appointment. That was good news. Just to skip ahead, it was, but it's really exhausting, right? So I feel like I'm sorry. I didn't expect to go on that rant. And to finalize, as promised, I'm just going to give you an alternative if you are still not convinced about the harsh soft polarity. I'm going to tell you about another way that I recently saw from a channel that I really like, that does readings that while they read the Marseille in a very different way than I do, or they interpret Marseille in a very different way, because I feel like the approach to the cards is kind of similar, but the interpretations are different, and so they are very different, but I really enjoy watching them because they do live readings, and they have a really great channel, a really great Instagram. I think it's called the Hermit's Lantern, and in that one they explained in one video that the way they see the wands is either as work or when it's not about work, it's social. It's a social suit. And actually, they did explain how they get to social from the function of the wands. So, as I said, the approach is very similar, but they are getting different symbolic interpretations. So that is very interesting. Another video I could make would be that, like, how can you take the function and expand it to get different interpretations of the cards, of the pips? Because I'm keeping it simple in this tutorial where I'm saying sword, weapon, cutting, defend, attack. But you can get all sorts of associations if you continue to expand. But that's another thing. Anyway, so what I was trying to say is that if you're still uncomfortable with saying this is an obstacle, so this is also harsh, and you say, oh yeah, it makes more sense to be social or work or whatever association, I'm going to reiterate one thing that I said in another installment of this series, either episode 1 or 2, I don't remember. A very important thing to keep in mind that does, I think, have to remain true, unless you want to read the Marseille as if RWS, like saying, oh, I don't know, this is the Three of Wands, what does the Three of Wands mean? Like, everyone is free to do so, but if you want to read the Marseille in a more Marseille-y way, that doesn't involve meanings, I highly, or actually I don't highly recommend, I think it's necessary that the pips keep the same association. So if you're still uncomfortable with a harsh, soft polarity and you want to assign a different association, it has to remain the same for all. You can't say this one card is about work, but this one card is about feelings. If it's about work or about social or about etc., everything is everyone's cards represents the same association. And that's it. That would be it for today's episode of the Marseille series. I don't have a specific number of videos in mind. I think I will just keep adding videos every time I feel inspired to do so. The next one will be the video about interaction. and the next one about story, and the next one about how to get an answer to a question from all that. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you with another video, hopefully sooner rather than later. And in the meantime, I wish you happy reading, whether that be book reading, card reading, pendulum, dice, coins, weather patterns, charms, whatever form of reading you prefer.